Euh, Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue à cette
Hello,
deuxième
everyone, and welcome to our second session of the webinar series for the Intercouncil Network,
intitulée par
ICN,
l'engagement du public plus décolonial,
towards a
antiraciste et
more
féministe. Je m'appelle Razou
decolonial,
Risad
anti-racist, feminist
and I'm
public
ICN
engagement. I'm
National
responsible
Program
for
Manager.
the
Good morning, everybody,
ICN
and
National
welcome to
Program.
the second session of the Intercouncil Network webinar series towards a more decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist public engagement. My name is Razou Risad, and I'm the ICN National Program Manager. As usual, I'll start with discussing few technical items. It will be a little bit a repetition of what happened in the previous webinar, so please bear with me. Before, we have simultaneous interpretation available. To select your preferred language, you will find a globe icon at the bottom of your screen for the interpretation, which you can use to select the language you'd like to listen to. Nous avons l'interprétation simultanée.
We have simultaneous interpretation available. Select your preferred language. Please find a globe icon at the bottom of the screen, and you can select the language that you would like to hear during this meeting.
If you have difficulties with the interpretation, closed captioning, or any other technical issues, please reach out to us in the chat and we'll do our best to help resolve them as quickly as possible. We have a great team that is supporting us, which is Rashni, the ACIC Communications Manager, and Matteo, ICN Communications Officer, that I thank so much for their support. Avant de commencer aussi, j'aimerais vous présenter
Before getting
brièvement.
started, I also wanted to briefly present the Intercouncil Network, the ICN. It's a coalition bringing together 8 provincial and regional councils for international cooperation. These councils fight to promote social justice and social change around the world. They represent more than 350 organizations from civil society all across the country from ocean to ocean. The councils are leaders in public engagement, and the network gives a national platform that allows the councils to collaborate in order to improve their effectiveness and identify common priorities for collective action. To know more about the network, please consult our website and follow us on social media.
We also before delving into today's content, we would like to acknowledge that we are hosting this webinar in Mi'kmaq. This is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1726. We ask that we all consider this and the land on which we walk as we participate in today's webinar. We feel it is important to keep this in mind and know and honor the land that we're on. The ICN works with many communities across Canada, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities, as well as communities around the world in the international development sector. And we feel it's important to reflect on this, draw lessons from our colonial history and how this history intersects in many ways with the issues we are facing today in working towards a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. I would like also to remind you that on September 30th, we will have the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Also, today's date is part of, how to say, in September 23rd, today, the second global climate strike of this year is happening. I would like to also to move to an overview of the webinar. We will start with an introduction of the speakers, then we will hear from the panelists and end with the Q&A session. Please use the chat to introduce yourselves and comment on today's topic. Any harmful, disrespectful, or inappropriate language or comments will not be tolerated. You may also use the Q&A function later to address any questions to the speakers. Today's webinar will be moderated by Sarah. Sarah Danks has worked in the nonprofit sector for 6 years. Most recently, she worked for Videa as their communication and fundraising officer. where she headed Videa's annual fundraiser, the Global Solidarity Challenge. She has experience in event planning, social media management, inclusive and accessible engagement, and finance support. Sarah is also a Spirit Change 2022 Youth Champion and is currently completing her Master of Communication at Carleton University. Sarah was born and raised on the traditional and unceded territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, and she now lives and learns on the traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. Sorry, Sarah, if I mispronounced the name. Sarah is passionate about learning, human rights, photography, and accessibility. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It's so lovely to be here, and I'm so excited for everyone to meet today's panelists, and just thank you so much already for the panelists for being here. I can't wait to hear from you and learn from you. I'm just going to go around and ask our panelists to introduce themselves. I'll start off with Layla. Would you like to go first to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Bonjour à tous. My name is Leila Mumijwasi. I am a Nigerian, Cameroonian, Banikez, Bazou, Zarma, gender fluid person living on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Ganingahaga peoples in what is colonially known as Montreal. I am the racial justice expert at the Anti-Racist Cooperation Hub housed at Cooperation Canada. And I'm really excited to be here with everyone and very, very interested in where our conversation will go and how we'll connect today on these topics. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Layla. Esperanza, would you like to go next? Oh, can you please unmute yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Esperanza Monsalve, she and her, and I'm joining today from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, known also as Toronto. And I am a Colombian Canadian woman working right now with the YMCA of Greater Toronto, and here to share my experience as a co-chair of the Indigenous Reconciliation Working Group Committee. And I am also the manager of the international programs of the YMCA, through which we work in partnership with organizations in Latin America and Africa. Happy to be here and really looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Esperanza. Jenna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Gwain Delvisi Jenna Warapixi Unamaki, Sydney Mi'kmaq. What I said in the Mi'kmaq language is hello, folks. My name is Jenna Robar. I'm from the land of the fog, Unama'ki, in Nova Scotia, known as Mi'kmaq. I'm coming into this gathering today as a Mi'kmaq Ilnu or Acadian background. Sorry, just having some technical issues. Yes, so I wanted to thank you so much for having me. I'm the manager of Indigenous relationships. I work closely with Esperanza. I'm also on the DEIB team, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. It's a great team. And yeah, I'm also a member of the Indigenous Reconciliation Working Group. I myself am a newer member of just about 5 months, but happy to share my experiences as an Indigenous person in this group. Thank you folks for having me.
Thanks, Jenna. Great to have you here. Veronica, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Veronica Nirongo. I'm in Lusaka, Zambia. I work with Videa. Thank you so much.
Great to see you as always, Veronica. Lily, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Liliana Koizlozell. Most people call me Lily, and my pronouns are she, her. And I am born and raised here on Treaty 6 territory in Amaskwaci, Waskahikan, Edmonton, Alberta. And I'm a proud member of the Métis Nation of Alberta. And I also work at VIDEA with Veronica. I work as the Manager of Indigenous Youth Engagement and Reconciliation. And I feel very fortunate to work with an incredible team at VIDEA, including Veronica, my fellow co-panelist here in Canada, as well with our overseas partners in Zambia and Uganda. So great to be here with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here again. I'm very excited to hear from you. With that, I'm just going to jump right into the questions. Please feel free, if all of you want to answer, if maybe only one or two of you want to answer, if you want to include or follow up with anything, I welcome any and all commentary on the questions. So let's get into this and I can't wait to hear your answers. All right. Is there a project, initiative, public engagement activity that you can share with us to highlight your use of decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist approaches in public engagement?
I can go ahead. So the project that I'm working on is called the Anti-Racist Cooperation Hub. It's a new project that was established in the sector by a group of volunteers working from organizations off the side of their desks over the last year and a half until myself and my co-lead were hired in the position. The Anti-Racist Cooperation Hub is the only project that could have brought me back to the international cooperation sector. It's a project grounded in bringing anti-racist, decolonial, I know that this is an interesting way to say it, but the right perspectives to international cooperation. It is a coordination secretariat that's meant to kind of help guide the sector forward in a lot of the ways in which anti-racism kind of is this big, vague topic that we kind of assign a bunch of different meaning and perspectives and goals to, and kind of really support the sector in establishing these principles and ways of work into how we work as a sector. And something that's really important to us in understanding how feminism and anti-racism and decolonization are integrated in this work is really meeting the sector where it's at, establishing this way of work in a way that's really going to be sustainable for how different organizations, different people in different positions are coming at this work, but really grounded in the fact that Canada is a Western nation with a lot of work to do and a very terrible history, like a very violent history, both on its land and in the ways in which it's engaged with other countries. And so really wanting to make sure that instead of focusing on these words that a lot of the time in our actions don't mean much, that we're really looking at how we're working and centering and really amplifying the voices of people who are affected by this work, who have been affected by this work, and challenging the ways in which power has shaped our sector in how we come at developing the world and really engaging with made vulnerable countries and communities. So it's a project that's just starting. Obviously, it's in its first months, and so it's a very overwhelming place to be in kind of having a lot of hopes, a lot of dreams, and a lot of priorities. My co-lead and I are both from communities who have been affected by colonization and who are directly everyday affected by this work. And so there's a heaviness on this work, and there's a heaviness on bringing the sector to understanding different perspectives of this work after so many years of not prioritizing anti-racism in how we do a very racially specific type of work. But that's a little bit about where we're at. We're very much in the beginning stages, but we're really hopeful that we can work with the sector to kind of just guide the work that's already happening and just support us to some really important goals in creating sustainability and inclusion in our sector.
Thank you for sharing first, Layla. I know that can be intimidating to put your voice into the room, but it's so great to hear it and very exciting as well to have a project that's so new. And while I know there's probably some anxiety around the gravity of it all, I hope there's also a feeling of hope there that's sustaining this work as well. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Did anyone else want to answer this question? I know a few of you have some very interesting projects going on. Please don't be shy.
I can go next.
I can.
Oh, that's okay. I can go.
Okay, thank you so much. So as the idea, we have a project which is called Internship Program for Indigenous Youth, as well as a youth conference. And so I've been doing this project for so long. Before COVID, we used to have physical one, whereby youths from Canada would come to Zambia. Maybe they will stay for 3 months. Yeah, each cohort could stay for 3 months. They will come and learn different things, share ideas, and so on. Yeah, but after COVID, we started online one. Yeah, and we've been doing it now. We have cohort 4. Yeah, we started last year. And we've also been doing youth conferences. Before COVID, we used to do it physically every year, but after COVID, we started doing online. So we started the online one last year. Yeah, it has been going so well. And youths from Canada, Uganda, Ghana, and Zambia, they were all joining. Yeah, and Lily and Sarah have been to Zambia before. Yeah, and been helping each other, planning, and so on. Yeah, that's so. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Yes, I've had the honor of seeing that project up close and personal, and it's a very exciting one. Esperanza, did you want to go now?
Yeah, thank you. The initiative I would like to share, and we would like to share with Jenna today about, is what is called today Indigenous Reconciliation Working Group. And I say today because even today we are questioning our own name. Should it be reconciliation or should it be pre-reconciliation working group? This is one of the 3 diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging groups in the YMCA of DPA, together with the Pride group and the Black Experience Committee. And it is a group made of a staff that was formed in 2018. So we have been working for 4 years. Initially, we were 20 members coming from different programs. Today, we are 10 from programs such as health and fitness, child and family development, newcomer programs, employment. And when we came together in 2018, we had initially envisioned 2 goals. Pre-formation was to bring awareness to initiatives, programs, and or services for Indigenous peoples that were offered by the YMCA of GPA. And the second one was to map the initiatives of programs that we had at the time. So simple, we set these 2 goals, we're gonna get together and we're gonna get this done. And then the very first meeting, we realized that we actually could not bring awareness or offer programs internally or externally unless we did some work prior to that. First of all, we look around the room and we realized that we didn't have representation of Indigenous people. None of us would identify as Indigenous. So how could we go bring awareness to somebody else or even internally? So we could not speak on behalf of Indigenous peoples. And representation then became a central pillar of our work as a group. Representation of Indigenous peoples, as staff members, as volunteers, participants, representations really at all levels. That was the first realization. And then we also thought about, okay, bringing awareness, but let's look first at our own knowledge. So none of us felt that we were experts, and we realize now we will never be, because we could not speak on behalf of Indigenous people about their stories and their cultures and their challenges, the challenges their communities were facing in the past and are still facing today. So we kind of said, okay, let's take a new look, and then we will set up different goals. So the first one was encourage association-wide awareness and understanding of our collective history through education and training. So education for our own group and for the whole association at all levels, and also nurturing existing relationships and build new relationships with Indigenous organizations and communities, and really develop meaningful partnerships that help strengthen First Nations, Métis, and Inuit populations. So that was kind of said, okay, let's for now, these are our goals, and we realize now that our goals are always changing. And some things to highlight about that history is that this initiative started actually as a result of public engagement initiatives of other organizations like OICIC and Kairos, because it was precisely an AGM of OICIC, I think in 2017, when they offered the blanket exercise, and I experienced that blanket exercise for the first time. And then we started inviting to the YMCA, and a lot of staff, frontline and senior staff, were going through the blanket exercise that created a readiness for action, kind of a need to do something and to respond to, as an organization, to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. So I feel that that was a need, that these two awareness from the senior staff and also from the frontline staff came together to move this to action. So I am going to stop there. I hope we can share with Jenna some other things about the project in the following questions. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much for that detailed response, Esperanza. It's great to hear what you're getting up to. Would anyone else like to share for this question before I move on?
Yeah, I can just add a little bit to what Veronica was talking about too. There are a couple of initiatives that we weave into our programs at FIDEA that I wanted to speak to, and they're both kind of fun. One of them is our storytelling hour, and I love talking about our storytelling at FIDEA. It started kind of right at the beginning when COVID first started, and it was a way to bring all of our community together when we couldn't physically gather, and it just kind of kept going. And despite the fact that we are able to gather in person a little bit more now, we continue to hold this space once a week. Every Monday evening for an hour, we have our storytelling hour. And so we have folks from around the world join us, and we have anywhere between 20 and 100 people join the line. And it's a really accessible and decolonial safe space for people to join and basically share stories. And storytelling is such an important part of what we do at FIDEA, and it really gives us the opportunity to elevate the voices of folks who might not feel comfortable sharing their voices in different spaces. And it also gives us a chance to connect with our overseas partners and our friends from around the world and engage the public and build solidarity. So that's something that we really love at FIDEA and continue to do. And then the other one I just wanted to speak to too is, and Veronica mentioned our Indigenous Youth Internship Program. And one of the things we do as part of this program is we call them IVIDs. So they're Indigenous Voices in Development. And it's an Instagram page where we have all of our youth interns share short videos of them basically just talking about what they've been learning in their internships and engaging the public on some of the issues they've been learning about. And it's a really cool way for these youth to engage with what they've been learning in a way that's accessible to them. It's social media. They're able to connect with their own communities, and also it's a chance for them to really reflect on what they've been learning in the communities overseas and connect it with their own communities and really build that knowledge and knowledge sharing and building that solidarity as well. So those are just a couple of initiatives that we've done as we've been going on our own decolonization journey at FIDEA. Yeah, I'll pass it back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Lily. Always great to hear about those programmings. I always look forward to storytelling. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question, if that's all right with you. So Are there key lessons that have emerged from the use of decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist approaches in public engagement? Or what strategies have worked well in cultivating change in public engagement for you?
I think I could start. So what's great about the IRWG, we call it the Indigenous Reconciliation Working Group that Esperanza was talking about, was that it's ever evolving. It's not staying stuck in one place. We're thinking about, how do we not be complacent? How do we move forward? How do we learn and bring others with us and encourage folks and plant seeds? This is one thing that I really, really enjoy about the group. And like I said earlier, I'm still pretty new. Evolving even out of COVID and getting out into community and doing things with community is something that we're seeing more of, that we're doing more of today. And even getting invited back to community, which feels really good. You know, we within our strategy that just came out a few months ago. Congratulations, Robin, again. We're moving kind of again, evolving maybe out of this decolonial word that we're using and more into an anti-colonial approach and into how we work. And if I can break that down a bit, the decolonial, you look at the D, the prefix, and that's actually a removal or a separation. And the anti-colonialism is like the resistance, the opposition. It's specifically against those colonial systems that we are still upholding today and that we're still living in today. So this is a shift that we're making when I say we're evolving, and we're becoming more creative. So when I think of what we call reconciliation to me as an Indigenous person in the community, it's all about relationships. You know, we can say reconciliation, we can write policy about reconciliation, we can infuse it into everything that we do, but specifically at the heart of it is relationships. So this is something I think that we're focusing in on more, and that I think is going to be great for us, for community, and really to encourage others to build those relationships as well. Something else that Esperanza and I were talking about when we were looking at these questions and saying, you know, is this something that we do every time that we join an IRWG meeting? You know, are we asking the question of is this a decolonial, anti-racist, feminist space? You know, we don't ask that question every time we join together, but at the basis of it is respect, is evolution, progress forward, and learning and relationship building, and the infusion of all these different aspects that we really try to embody and again plant seeds. And I think that's where I'll leave it.
Thank you, Jenna. I especially like your emphasis on the ever evolving. It's very active, and I think something that's very important in decolonial and anti-racist work is that it has to constantly be changing and learning from its environment. So that's an amazing thing to emphasize.
I can go. I'm sorry if my mind is all over the place. I feel like lately I have a hard time settling my thoughts, but I think some of the lessons that I've learned in doing this work would start with, it has always been really interesting to me how much we focus on words before actions. I think in English language, words are really meant to categorize. We're really focused on titling things, whereas I think in a lot of Indigenous languages globally, at least the ones that I've engaged in conversation about, it's a lot about experience and describing and really like feeling and experiencing life and how we engage in it. And so I think sometimes when I hear of decolonization and I think of anti-racism and I think of feminism, I'm like, for one, the art project has a specific mandate of bringing about anti-racist change and feminist change. But for me, I can't see those things as separate, and I can't see those things only under the understandings of their practices and their principles in how we talk about them. And so I think for one, and it goes kind of into the point of communities, I think, in the way in which we do this work, especially from the West and the side of being in a superpower country, or in a country that has made vulnerable other countries and other communities. I think one of the things that has always been really important to me is really when we are working with made vulnerable communities and countries, that our focus be on understanding those histories, engaging in the conversations, and really letting folks lead. I think the polarization right now and the focus on localization is a really important a point in these conversations on how we keep trying to figure out, how do we do localization? How do we make localization work? And it's like, well, if you want to hold on to power, and if you want to hold on to being the side that figures these things out, you most likely will never figure them out, because the end goal is empowering communities that, if empowered, change the dynamic in a way that destabilizes us. And so I think in what strategies have worked and what are the key lessons, the first thing for me has always been honesty. I think it is very important for our sector to be really honest about the end goals, and the ways in which we are willing to challenge power, the ways in which we're willing to give up power, how we're willing to meet Indigenous communities around the world, how we're willing to work with them, how much we're willing to validate their experiences, their traditions, their histories. I was in conversation recently while working on our conference at Cooperation Canada with some folks that work with globally Indigenous communities. And it was interesting to talk about even how we think about things like conservation, and how for us that's in a lot of ways it falls into a decolonial practice. And for a lot of Indigenous communities, to conserve land that has life, that has an identity, that has its autonomy, is something that is really dangerous. But for us, and how we practice decolonization and how we practice our relationship with other communities, we haven't really questioned what these things mean in practice. And so I think it is really important for us when we're thinking about decolonization, anti-racism, feminism, whatever other equity topics we're focusing on at the time, or are of interest at the time, to really, one, think about our identities and our experiences and our stories. And I think when we're doing this work outwards, really wanting to question how much we're willing to be uncomfortable to make real change. Because I know that in watching even what has happened in between Canada and the US when it comes to racism and anti-Black racism, and even ARC came out of the death of George Floyd, and ARC is a direct result of the international cooperation sector kind of trying to understand its place in how the death of George Floyd challenged our participation in racist structures and societal norms. And it's interesting because I think since 2022, a lot of things have changed, and you've kind of heard, you've seen that it's no longer at the forefront. And when it's not at the forefront, it doesn't receive the attention and isn't validated in a way that creates change, the important change that was called on by these really important events. And so I know I'm rambling and I feel like I've lost my train of thought a little bit, but I think it is very important for us to be very honest about our willingness to give up power and to really listen to communities and give the power that we've taken from those communities and the power that we have built based off of the dehumanization of these communities, the colonization of these communities, and sometimes the erasure of these communities. It's really important for us to be able to give that power back in a way that's not tied to anything, that holds no expectations, that really, no matter how scary it is for us, is acknowledging the fact that, like, when I think of, my mom is from Niger, and through that is Zarma. The Zarma people have no pre-recorded history to their colonization map. If I want to learn more about the Zarma, like, it is almost impossible for me to do that, except for the elders that keep it through oral history and who are dying off. And so it's just, I think it is really important for us as a sector to I don't know, when I came into the sector, there was, and I promise I'm wrapping up soon, but when I came into the sector, there was a point that was really, it was around the we era. A lot of us were really at the time very interested in going across the world and really like building schools and building wells, and then we came into this era of challenging saviorism and the ways in which we think that we are the answer to communities that we don't understand, aren't trying to actively understand. And I think it is important for this sector to realize that although we aren't still validating building wells and taking pictures of children without consent or compensation, and just really like coming in and out of countries that we don't belong to, I think that there is a very intense saviorism that this sector is built off that has to be challenged, because I don't know how, it is hard for me to reconcile the infantilization of the countries within Africa for how much the world depends on Africa. And if we think about that, the disempowerment that happens through that is how we as a sector continue to be able to exist. We can continue to build organizations that are going to go into African countries and help people out in the different ways that we're finding to define and to distract from the fact that in the end, we are still the ones holding the power and waiting for these communities to depend on us to give them the freedom that they're allowing to have through they're allowing us to have through their disempowerment. And so all that to say, I think the key lessons and strategies that I think are very important when it comes to these is honesty and really letting go of power and listening to the communities that have honestly have had knowledge and practices that have allowed this world to continue to run, and that we've depended on in ways that we're not willing to admit and challenge.
Layla, listen, I know we don't have all day, but I could listen to you rant all day. I think you just like hit the nail on the head there. That was an amazing summation of some of the core issues that our sector has and needs to deal with to be able to move forward in the future. So thank you so much for sharing. That was amazing. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add on this question? Lily, I see you're unmuting.
Yeah, well, first of all, as you said, Sarah, oh my gosh, I have like shivers, Layla. That was all just so well said. I really loved how you talked about the idea of giving power back with no expectations. That yeah, that sentence is so powerful in itself. So thank you for sharing. And what I just want to share about quickly is it speaks to a lot of what others have already talked about. And it's a key lesson that we have been learning and continue to learn at BIDEA with the question of how can we do public engagement that is decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist. And it seems kind of obvious, but we've really learned the importance of creating spaces that are decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist, and what that looks like and how we can do that in a good way. And we've been learning this and how we can do this kind of at a smaller level within our own organization and day-to-day work, but also what that looks like at all different levels as well in the sector as a whole. And a few things that we've been learning of how we can really do this is looking at really creating safe spaces where everyone feels empowered and safe to share their voice. And that's kind of easier said than done. And it doesn't happen enough in the sector. These spaces often aren't what they should be and don't allow people to feel safe to share their voices. And so we've learned about, the importance of grounding our work in Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And as Jenna said, highlighting the importance of relationships and building relationships within our organization that are, rooted in reciprocity and respect. Some of the ways we do that at BIDEA are like, just team meetings twice a week where we get to know each other and build those relationships. and also, you know, the importance of wellness and ensuring everyone's wellness is a priority in our spaces. We have an Indigenous Wellness Wednesday every week at IDEA, and just, yeah, the importance of everyone feeling well and safe and heard in these spaces is so important. Another thing too is the importance of recognizing diverse knowledge sets around the world, such as ancestral, traditional knowledge and life experiences, instead of only looking at, you know, Western education standards like a university degree. And then some of these, they seem kind of obvious, but they're still not done, you know. And what we see often is a lot of, you know, there's a place at the table for diverse voices, but they're not actually listened to or heard or elevated in a way that will create real change and be anti-racist, feminist, decolonial in the way that the public is engaged with. So it's, yeah, just as all of you been speaking, it's like, you know, the idea of letting go of the power and how can we do that? Well, spaces, having these spaces to be able to cultivate that and do that is something we've learned at IDEA is really, really important. I'll probably leave it at that because I know we have other questions to get to still, but yeah, thank you all for sharing.
Lily, it's like you read my mind. I had already written out a follow-up question about decolonizing within before decolonizing outside. Perfect, because we need to move on. Don't even need to ask it. All right, next question. With changing global contexts, what priority areas in public engagement should we pay more attention to?
I can go and I'll try to be quick. I think with one of the biggest global contexts of being like, COVID changed everything and brought us into a really technological era. I think it is really intentional for us to be it is very important for us to be very intentional in how we are engaging the public, both in any way, and especially when we are doing it abroad. I think it's interesting because when the pandemic started, I was of the mind that it is really incredible that we are now sharing technologies so that there are people now across the world that we can engage with in a way that we couldn't before, even though there was a lot more mobility. But then when I think about how globalization has affected communities across history and how we think about connectedness, how we think about engagement, how we think about what globalization looks like, how we meet each other as people who have different interests, different ways of existing, different ways of just like even connecting as a community, but to other communities. I think about the dangers of how technology has been brought into communities that didn't necessarily have it before, and how that is going to in the future, how that is going to change our perception of connectedness. I think that there is a really important way in which we have to think, and this was also from a conversation that we were having with a partner at Cooperation Canada. There's an important way of us needing to think how colonial histories have been communicated and preserved to other communities. And I think that even when we think of technology, we think of technology on our side as something that's really great. It allows accessibility. It is something that allows us to reach other people. But I think for a lot of communities that have avoided technology and who don't really have a need for its place in how they exist culturally and traditionally, we impose these beliefs and we impose these ways of existing and these ways of connecting and these ways of seeing the future and what the future looks like and means onto them with like this heavy positivity, when it may not actually be something that is positive for the future of this community. And I think especially when we think of traditional ways of connecting through globally Indigenous communities, there's a lot that just has to do with how we meet each other face to face in person. And I think obviously COVID made that hard, because meeting face to face, even if we love doing it, what became something that was dangerous. But I think that a lot of the time from the side of the West, we think of solutions that are very based off of our way of thinking in a way that we haven't really challenged our colonial mindsets as in a lot of ways of colonial power, that when we don't do that challenging, we create harm that isn't going to be noticed until it's too late. And So I think that when it comes to priority areas, it really goes, it's always going to go back for me to really listening to Indigenous communities around the world, really sitting down and being like, how do you function as a community? What are your goals as a community? What's important to you as a community? How do you want to meet us before how are we planning on meeting you? Like really wanting to center their approaches and their perceptions of their histories and their futures before we come in and impose ways of working that honestly are the ways in which kind of like the octopus tentacles kind of go into other communities and control, but from afar in a way that we can stay disconnected to. So yeah, I think intention is a priority area that we don't really focus on and we don't really question enough. But it really has to, at some point, is going to have to be that we really prioritize Indigenous voices in a way that, again, like I said before, gives away power and is honest about what the goals have to be for true sustainability, not sustainability defined by our perceptions and hopes for the future, which are based in our own power and control.
Very well said. Thank you, Layla. Also, the emphasis on thinking that the Western way is the best way for all these countries is such an awful take. And I completely agree that it's something that we just need to completely do away with. So thank you for that once again.
I can go. Okay, so thank you very much. Yeah, so like as for me, before COVID, things were different, but after COVID, things really changed. So like, as for me, like I said about our project internship program and youth conferences. So before COVID, they used to come here and I used to go around my community, schools, talking about early marriages, gender equality, gender-based violence, and so on. Because in my community, there's high levels of early marriages. Yeah, and very few people are educated. Actually, I'm even the first one, and as at now, I'm the only one who even reached the tertiary level. So I always have had like talking to my community, trying to tell them the importance of education. Yeah, so when the interns used to come here in Zambia, we could go together in my communities, and even the community were so happy. Yeah, even as at now, they even ask, when are they coming again? We used to see them most of the times. When are they coming again? I'm like, no, because of COVID. Yeah, just like that. And then those in rural areas, it's very hard for them to know important information due to no access to internet, and it's really hard. So for me, we thought it at Vidya to say it's still important for them to have access to internet, like to attend the youth conference. So what we usually do as Vidya, we'll get the youths from rural areas and bring them in town to attend the youth conference. So even last year, we got some youths from rural areas and bring them in town where they had access to internet just to attend the youth conference. Even this year, we're still doing the same. Yeah, so for that one, I'm so happy because it's not easy, and we still continue helping them. At least they should be able to have access to important information, even if they're in rural areas, because in rural areas, they have a lot of disadvantages, especially to have access to internet. Yeah, so I feel like we should continue physical meetings as well after COVID. Yeah, and apart from that, as for me, when COVID started, well, I was like, no, since we have no physical meetings, and then I made a decision to say I'll be recording some important information in local languages and send to different areas in hard copies, as well as submitting to local radio stations, just for information to reach them. Yeah, that's so. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, for sharing your experiences. I know how hard you work to put information over the radio as well as in hard copies, and how valued that your knowledge is. So thank you so much for sharing about that. Did anyone else want to comment on this question before I move on to our last one?
Yeah, I'd like to say something that was really, as I was listening to Sonia, one of the speakers of the webinar the day before yesterday, Sonia was talking about a multi-sectoral approach. And I think really the global context is calling us for that approach. Sonia was talking about how it's not only about environment or climate change, but really understand all the systems and how they are interconnected. So I think that a more multi-sectoral and also intersectional approach to public engagement is essential. And at our own level as a committee, even though it is an internal committee with some external reach, we have experienced that when we work in isolation, we're only talking about one of the dimensions of our work. But when we join in collaboration with the other committees, the Black Anti-Racism Committee and the Pride, then it becomes a much more powerful experience, not only for the public that are experiencing these events or these learnings, but also for ourselves. So I think it's part of the colonial structures to keep us in boxes, in isolation. So how do we learn to work together? I think that's an important an important emphasis that we need to make as a sector, and as many other things that have been said. We have heard that we need to work in collaboration, in partnership. Since the Sustainable Development Goals, we know we need to collaborate. Otherwise, we are not going to reach the goals, and we're not reaching them. And I think it seems like we are struggling individually or as individual organizations to achieve our goals. But I think in working in collaboration in Canada, within the organization or outside Canada is essential, in collaboration with others and with all the points that were mentioned before. I think it's another thing that we need to really put emphasis as a sector.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for emphasizing that point, Esperanza. It is an extremely important one. All right, I'll move on to our last question that I have before the Q&A. What is a concrete action that sector members can take as a step towards more decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist approaches in public engagement?
I can start with this one. I think a concrete action that every organization should start is just starting your own journey of decolonization. I also just want to say that I loved, Jenna, what you said about changing the language and looking at anti-colonization. Love to talk to you about that. But anyways, yeah, I think that for concrete action, one of the first steps in this process is just like, everyone should really take a hard look at yourselves and also your organization that you work with, the spaces that you work within, and the work that you do, and start asking hard questions such as, whose voices are being included, whose are not. How is our leadership and governance structured? Those kind of questions that make you look at the way things are done and whose voices aren't included, and kind of what needs to change. And then after doing that kind of, we call it like a mind map. You kind of just break down yourself, your identity, and any identities that you work with, and look at the privileges that you have, the power that you hold, the power that others don't hold, and then from there look at making a shift. So what needs to change, what patterns have to be disrupted, and yeah, I think that's just a really good way to start on a decolonization journey, which will lead to creating more spaces and ways to just change the way that you work and run public engagement that is more anti-racist, feminist, and decolonial. It's something that we've started at Idea, and we've changed and pivoted the way we work in the past few years a lot, and it's really improved the way that we work and do things, and we've grown our organization exponentially in the work that we've done. And it's definitely, yeah, had a big impact on us. And it's really important, like this sector, more than in any sector, in my opinion, really has to take a hard look at ourselves and change the way we work. And, you know, take a look at all the incredible resources that are so important to look at: the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, looking at those calls to action, connecting with the ones that are most relevant to the work that you do, and shifting based on that. So that's just a concrete action that I think every individual and organization should really start with to be able to do this public engagement in a good way.
Thank you, Lily. And I appreciate that, in the fact that this is something that you can do at a personal level right now. If you wanted to, you could get started. And I know the mapping for myself has been very helpful as well. It's a great reflexive activity, and also a great way to think about your impact. So thank you for sharing, Lily.
Can I just add on what Lily said just a little bit? Yes, I think organization also should be making sure that public engagement is safe and accessible to everyone, not only to those in urban areas, no, at least to everyone, even those in rural areas. I've been there before. We are missing a lot of information just because we're in rural. So I think organizations should be looking at that as well. It should be accessible to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, for adding that very important point. It's something that can't be forgotten.
If I could add on to Liliana's thoughts, to really starting where you are. You do not need to be an expert to make advances, to make changes. Two pieces that I'll share with folks. First one, to start with what you're interested in. This is something that I give to folks kind of as an intro, something approachable. Start with what you're interested in: politics, arts, sports, you know, whatever that is, and see what you can learn. See what you're interested in, see what you gravitate towards, see what you can learn. The second one, start with where you're uncomfortable. Explore why that is, because often that's a sign that it's the most needed place for you to start. So those are two concrete actions, and maybe a reminder as a cherry on top, reminder that those relationships that you are building are not yours to claim, right? Those are not your relationships to claim. I know when it comes to my cultures, you can't claim your community that you're from. You can't claim your identity. It's your community. It's your own people that are claiming you. So when you're making relationships with Indigenous folks, with organizations, with whoever it is that you're trying to build relationship with, it's your effort that is going to allow those organizations, those communities, to claim you as an ally, let's say, or as a partner. So I'm just going to leave that there for what it is, but I agree with what folks are saying. These are really great steps.
Thank you, Jenna. That's a really great point. And I also like focusing on the uncomfortable, because that is so key. And it's the area that people tend to avoid a lot, because if they run from that discomfort, but you really should be running towards it. So thank you.
I think just going off what's been said, I think something that is, for me, unusually absent is just, and it's, I think it happens after you do what has been said before me, is that like honesty is something that I think a lot of people are really scared to be. And for me, I've always said in my training and in my educational and consultancy work in the equity field, I feel like something that I've always said, if you are sitting in a room and I'm at the front of it doing, let's say, a workshop, and you're sitting there and you're like, I absolutely do not care what this Black person has to say. Like, I don't want to listen to Black folks. I don't want to hear about anti-racism. That is not of my interest, and it will never be of my interest. it is actually very important for how you engage with communities, for you to be very honest after having interrogated yourself on what your perspectives are. It allows for other people to have the autonomy to create safety around themselves and to create plans on how to engage with you further. The organizations that have met the ARC in this sector, the ARC hub in the sector, by saying we will not be engaging with this process and we do not want to be contacted by the ARC hub, are some of the most, that process is as important as any other process. And I think that a lot of the time people are like, well, why would it be good that somebody is saying I'm racist and that's just how I'm going to be forever? But I think a lot of the time people forget that there is a lot of unsafety that exists as marginalized communities of any sort in engaging with other folks. And without that honesty and without that clarity, that person doesn't have all of the information, that organization, that community doesn't have all of the information to ensure that they're engaging in a way also that isn't wasting their time, that isn't making them unsafe, that isn't going to produce unproductive outcomes. And so I would say that the two steps that have been brought up by Lily and Jenna and Veronica about and it goes back to safety, right? Of just being like, if you don't do that in interrogation, if you don't go through that process of seeing what makes you uncomfortable and delving into it, if you don't go through that process of really just like of looking out into the world and being like, where do I stand in the world? Where does my personal story stand in the world? Where does my personal story and its future fit in the world? We're just all wasting each other's time. And that is just a very unfortunate thing to do at the state that we are at in 2022. I mean, when I think about the fact that George Floyd died in 2020, and today you don't hear his name anymore, and all of the uproar that happened after his death has died down, and the same thing with Breonna Taylor and so many other folks who have died at the hands of anti-Black systems, here and across the world, I have to wonder if in those moments of uproar, people were really being honest about what they were getting, what they were hoping for, what they were benefiting from in engaging in these conversations. And so I think just generally as a community of folks that are engaging in these conversations in different ways or not engaging at all, it is really important for us to prioritize honesty, because we won't be able to build sustainability when we don't know the reality that we're living in. And we don't realize how unsafe we're being when we have perspectives that we may think don't fit into where the world is at right now. And we're keeping them to ourselves. And I think it's also really important to realize, I think a lot of folks really are of the mindset, and I will say the folks who tend to not engage in these conversations are of the mindset that we are in a time where we are really like anti-racism and decolonization and all of these things and feminism are at the forefront. And those are the most important things that we're talking about. I would argue that we are in we are still living in a very conservative and very avoidant world, and a world that's very avoidant to progress. And I think that in the ways that we talk about a lot of these things, it's very surface level, and we're not really willing to go deep into what it means to switch into the future, a future that actually prioritizes these things. When I think about organizations talking about prioritizing equity, for example, let's say we're planning an event and we want to prioritize equity, but we're not willing to cut out this section to make sure that we have enough resources to prioritize equity. It's just all of these little moments that I think we really need to sit down, ground ourselves, and really question how far we're willing to go to actually and intentionally make these things matter, instead of continuously gaslighting marginalized communities into believing that these things are actually at the forefront. Every time I think of decolonization and anti-racism, most of the time, if someone is coming into a conversation with me saying that these things are important to them and using those words in very vague ways, I'm like, okay, I kind of see where we're at here. So I'm gonna meet you where you're at, but we might have to have some conversations. And so I think as a community, as a sector, as a people that's moving forward in really uncertain and scary times, it is very much so time for us to prioritize honesty that may be uncomfortable, but at the end of the day is the only way that we can exist in reality in a way that creates sustainable futures that are safe for all of us.
Yes, Layla, thank you for bringing up that point. It's so important and not something that is often discussed, because it is so important for you to protect your time, protect your space, protect your resources, because you only have so much and they need to be focused where they're actually going to make an impact. So thank you for bringing up that point. Did anyone else want to respond to this question? Otherwise, I will move into the Q&A portion. Okay, let's move into the Q&A portion. I see we have a few questions in the chat. I believe this one was asked right at the beginning when we were answering the first question about the projects that you are currently doing. This question is, what are your current challenges that you're encountering in this project? So maybe what's a challenge that you've encountered in your public engagement project?
I can start. So like for me, mostly, since our internship program is just online, you find that interns will complain to say, how I wish we could also travel like our friends who could also travel to visit Zambia physically. Yeah, so they could complain just like that. And then youths from rural areas, they're also complaining, like when it comes to youth conference, we used to have physical ones and they used to come to Lusaka. Lusaka is capital city of Zambia. And even on my time, it was my first time to visit Lusaka, capital city of Zambia, when we used to have physical meetings, physical conference. So they are complaining to say how they wish they could also have that opportunity of visiting Lusaka to have a physical conference. I think those are the only challenges. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Veronica. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to share about challenges they've encountered in their projects?
I can go next. I'm sure others on the panel will probably be able to add to what I'm saying too and can relate. But I think one of the biggest challenges for us is we're doing this important work and looking at shifting the way we do public engagement and the way we work. And we're doing it within this larger system that is very pushing back and pushing us down. It's still, we're within these larger systems that are very colonial still and oppressive. And that can be really, really difficult to continue the work we do and sometimes very discouraging. And I can see a lot of nods because I think a lot of people can relate to this. And it's something we talk a lot about at IDEA as an organization with majority Indigenous staff is, you look at Western ways of knowing and being, and then Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and they clash, right? And so finding a way to do this work in a way that keeps everyone well and feeling safe and comfortable within these bigger systems that are pushing against us is really, really tough. And it once again emphasizes the importance of making sure everyone is well and grounding ourselves and ensuring that wellness is priority so that we can continue to do this work while keeping ourselves well. And another challenge too is just, and Layla spoke to this, is just a lot of time it's not taken as seriously and a lot of very performative and surface level, and we're doing our best to make it go more than that. But when these bigger systems are still just very surface level, it can be really hard. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we deal with in doing this work.
Yes, there's definitely a lot of exhaustion involved when having to deal with the larger systems, and taking care of yourself and prioritizing yourself is very important when doing this work.
I think going off of that, something in the folks really not taking this seriously, I think the fact that people think that decolonization, anti-racism, feminism are kind of side projects to the real work that this sector is doing is a really dangerous perspective to have, because if you think about communities, Indigenous communities to these lands and the ones around the world that we work with, we have survived some incredible things based in the beliefs and practices that are being diminished. And I think that it keeps going back to the lack of honesty and the ways in which sometimes also the lack of honesty is a tool to disempower communities, and kind of like the way that we talk about this work. And one of the ways I mean, I think the sector is trying to undo it now is like, I'll never forget when I was younger, seeing the commercials of African kids with flies around them, and really just wanting, and the way in which those pictures and those perspectives of different African communities have affected how the world sees the power that these communities have, and the way that we talk about these different communities affects how much power these communities have. So I think the fact that this work is often just seen as kind of hobby-like work, like it's so interesting to come in as a racial justice expert, which I mean, in its terminology is kind of it's an interesting title, but it's interesting because I think a lot of people, even just when I see them and talking to me, it's like, oh, like that's cute, and I'm like, well, I think it's interesting because I think of my expertise, I can only be an expert of my own experience, and that's what I use my experience to try and understand and meet folks in how I do this work. But I think that it is very important to really be recognizing that one of the struggles that wastes so much of our time is the fact that a lot of organizations, a lot of people in this work are not willing to be honest about the fact that they depend on the very communities that are infantilized by our work. And if we don't challenge these things, and if we don't think about the fact that international development in a lot of ways does depend on the disempowerment of these communities, like this work, if all of the communities that we work with were in a space where they were empowered and they could function in a way that we don't hold all of the strings, this sector in a lot of ways would crumble. And so in how we do this work, we're depending on continuing to create an image that kind of covers the fact that we depend on the disempowerment of the communities that we work with. And I think in the ARC Hub, kind of getting people to challenge that power imbalance and challenge that false sense of reality that we're trying to sell is a really hard thing to do, because then it changes and destabilizes the way in which we think of the future of the sector and how people engage in this work. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of hard to be in like this false reality, and you kind of have to tiptoe in it, but at the same time, you're like, what is going on? Because I know what my community brings to this work, and I know what my community brings to this world, but I'm engaging with people who are kind of still looking at us kind of in a way that makes it seem like we wouldn't be able to work by ourselves if the West didn't come and help us out. And so, yeah, I think the lack of honesty and reality, sense of reality, is a hard thing to navigate around.
Thank you, Layla. I'm going to just move on to the next question, if that's okay, because we have a few, and I don't think we're going to get to answer them all, but don't worry, if your question isn't answered, we can ask the panelists to respond and post their responses on the ICN website. But I think this one's really interesting, and I'd love to hear your answers on it. So what do you think about the feminist approach among these three approaches? As the feminist approach can be perceived as a Western concept, what needs to change in understanding and implementing feminist approaches in our sector? And also, how do we ensure the alignment of these three approaches moving forward? You know, that was a lot of questions all at once, but feel free to answer any part of it.
I would say that feminism from the Western perspective is a very dangerous thing to be imposing on other communities who are living very true feminism. And I think in a lot of ways, feminism is almost taken out of just the way in which that we exist as communities that are centered around community care, community health, community futures. And so I think that feminism is a term that always, I think sometimes when I hear it, I'm like, oh, like it's just, okay, I'm not loving it. That I think we really have to question the ways in which sometimes we look at communities where there may be only male chiefs, but you know that all of the women in the community, no decision is made without the women in the community or without the femmes in the community. And so I think it is very important for us, again, to go back to how we consistently come from the perspective that the way that we do things is right, and the ways our perspectives and how we think is the right way. And if we just bring that to the rest of the world, everything is going to be okay. Like if it's working on this side of the world. And so I think it's really important for us to and that's where it's important for us to separate ourselves from all of these words that we're kind of creating to box in perspectives that are outside and so much bigger than these words. I come from communities, and I think coming from a Muslim background on my mom's side, I think a lot of the ways in which we see Islam, and I think it's a very difficult conversation to have. It has a lot of parts, but I think it has been a very interesting thing to experience how women are talked about in Islam, when in a lot of communities, women are being uplifted in ways that the West could never understand and the West could never implement, because we aren't ready to address feminism and integrate feminist. We aren't ready to uplift femmes, women, folks of different identities that is honest and is diverse in a way that we don't understand. So I think, yeah, feminist approaches really do need to be, I think feminism as a whole is something that just is going to go through its own journey, but is very important to challenge and to kind of separate ourselves from when we're looking at communities that we don't necessarily understand or are trying to.
Thank you, Layla. Yeah, something I think about a lot is how, we say these terms and think that our Western language is the only way to describe these, when there's all these other languages out there that have words that we can't even begin to describe in the English language. And I think of those a lot in terms of these approaches as well. I really appreciate you explaining that and answering this question. Did anyone else want to add on to that? You're good. Okay. I think we have time for one more question then. All right. Thinking concretely, what specific policies, practices, processes, such as employment equity, collection of ethno-racial and other equity-informed disaggregated data, etc., do you think are critical and fundamental for racial justice change making?
I don't want, I feel like I'm taking up so much space. It's just I am someone who says and it's hard because I have not been to a workplace that has made space, an honest space, for how racialized communities are affected by workplaces. I think it's very important to recognize that the workplace is built off of the oppression of marginalized people. The structures in which we work in, how we work, is very much so something that doesn't work for a lot of people. I know that for me, I grew up very separate from how time works with numbers. We in our house, and it gave me a lot of anxiety as a kid, but it was very much so you do this task and then you do this task and then you do this task. So I'm going to do the dishes and then I'm going to go pick up your brother, and that way of thinking is something for me that is very comfortable, but it doesn't work when, let's say I'm having a conversation with someone, a partner, and it's we're working through something and it's a meeting that is for an hour, but now we're in 2 hours because we're just letting the conversation flow, and it doesn't fit within the structure of the workplace. And I think it's hard because what I'll say is that when folks are looking at how their workplace needs to be built for racialized communities, it's important to just give the power to racialized communities to say what they need and then be willing to make that change. I know that in every workplace, and sometimes it has ousted me from the workplace, I've come in, I've experienced the workplace, and I've said, this is what I need, this is what's not working, and this is what's making me unsafe in the workplace. And if a lot of the time folks are not willing to make the changes because they have to do with again, challenging power, changing the ways that we work, and making space for perspectives that we don't understand and that aren't going to necessarily be beneficial to us. And so I think it is very important for workplaces, again, to be honest with their employees about what they're willing to change, what perspectives they hold, and what goals they have for themselves, so that employees are able to make the decisions on if this workplace is safe, if they're willing to continue to be in this workplace, and how much change and energy they're willing to dedicate to change. Because I think it's very, very dangerous for workplaces to continue to be under this path of saying we are an equitable workplace and we are safe for racialized and marginalized folks, and we are really committed to change. And then when it comes, and that becomes a really attractive thing for folks who have lived so much trauma in different workplaces. And then you come in and you're like, well, I want this, or this isn't working, or I'm comfortable in this way. And then everyone's kind of like, whoa, okay, this is a little bit much. Like, you just gotta make it work. You have to find a way to make it work for yourself. This is how the workplace works. And then it becomes on the racialized person to make the decision on whether or not they're willing to stay or not. And it's very important to realize it's very hard for us to find jobs. A lot of the time, we're only going to be accepted in jobs that are already far along enough in their path to be even saying things like equity and are willing to fulfill quotas or specific for the communities that we're from. And if we're all having trouble finding those jobs, it means that a lot of the time we're ending up in unsafe spaces for a long time and having to live things that are not fair to have to live. And so, yeah, I think a lot of workplaces just have to put the power into the hands of the communities that are experiencing the workplaces in ways that they don't understand, and be willing to really be honest about the fact their willingness or lack of willingness. And when they're consistently challenged, like Jenna was saying earlier, you just sometimes have to be willing to sit in your discomfort, really, really challenge it, feel it, and know that that discomfort is a place of learning and growth and movement. And if you're not willing to do that, then you should know, if you're not willing to sit in discomfort, what you should be able to deduce is that you're most likely becoming unsafe for people who are making you uncomfortable. And so, yeah, after a lot of workplaces of a lot of false promises, I would say either be honest or keep it pushing, because we don't have the time or the energy to continue to be in spaces that are wasting our time, our expertise, our knowledge, our experience. We have places to be. And for a lot of us, we end up building things that are so out of this world that a lot of organizations that missed out on us are looking and have really missed out. So honesty always, for me, I know it's kind of corny, best policy.
Yeah, you tell them. Please do not apologize for taking up space and talking, because that is beautifully said. I don't know, I'm putting Lily on the spot here, but I don't know if you've prepared for this, but I know Michael was asking about specific policies, and I know Vidya implemented one, or we wrote up a document specifically for our auditors who didn't understand our workplace to kind of explain. I don't know, Lily, if you want to take like a minute just to even just talk about the process of how we made that policy.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Sarah. And I was thinking about that as Layla was speaking there, because yeah, that is something that we have done at Vidya, and it's a way to concretely be like, this is what we're doing at our organization to make you feel safe, and this is how we work. And for those who don't know how we work, it kind of gives them a better understanding of what we do and how we're maybe different than other organizations. So it's something that we as an organization worked on together too. So we all kind of came together and sat down and we're like, all right, we run this in this way, and we are, we're very inclusive in this way, and we run these programs to be able to do this, and just like really broke it down. And it's been, a really great way to kind of give that document. It's now just like a nice little document that's very pretty that we can give to, auditors or different organizations we're working with to get a better understanding of what we do. And then I also just wanted to add on to what Layla was saying about just what can be done to make it more put that, to give that power in a real way. And something that we find a lot, just made me think of it as Layla was speaking, is oftentimes you see a lot of organizations or platforms that are looking to hire, you know, more voices, more diversity, more perspectives, but then there's a lot of barriers to that. And that's something that made me think of that, reading that question too. You know, it's like, oftentimes you'll see like a job application that's looking for that, but then it's like, you need to have a university degree and be an expert in this. And that's not conducive to that equity. And it's not going to lead to real change. And you're not going to get the people you want to apply. Like, there's very few people who have all of those qualifications. And so if you really want to bring in those diverse voices and perspectives, there needs to be like it needs to be more accessible and inclusive, and that needs to be broken down too. And so, yeah, anyways, going back to that document that we made up IDEA, it's a way to just be like, this is how we work, you're safe here. And it's definitely something that I encourage everyone to do too, because even as like a member or a staff at IDEA who's been here for a couple of years now, it's a good way for me to be like, oh yeah, like that all makes sense. And that's what we do. And that's why this works. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Sarah.
Thank you. All right. I think we just squeezed in over the time here. If there's any questions that weren't answered that you really want to know the answer to, we can ask our panelists to respond to them and post them on the ICN network. I also forgot to mention at the beginning that the extended detailed bios for all of our panelists are on the ICN website if you would like to check those out as well. I just want to say thank you so much to the panelists for coming into this space and to being honest and on the spot and having detailed answers and just all of the knowledge that you brought here. We are so thankful for it. So thank you so much. And I will pass it back over to you, Kazu.
Thank you, Sarah. It's true. I'm so honored to be part of this discussion, to hear you, and I want to thank all the panelists for sharing your experiences and helping us to think about our work and to think about our role in general in the world and in the sector. I learned so much today, and I hope the participants also learned from this discussion to think about and to remember to give power back with no expectations, to that discomfort is a place of learning and growth, that we need to start by decolonizing within before decolonizing outside, and most importantly, to work hard to create those safe spaces. And we have also to ask the right questions to make our work decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist. Thank you so much, Leila, Esperanza, Jenna, Veronica, and Liliana. I want also to thank the ICN team. Thank you, Judy, Annette, Matteo, and Rashni. And I thank all the participants for staying with us and asking your questions and interacting with the panelists. I want to remind you that this is not the end of the journey. Follow us. We will share more about our research, about the ICN research. We're open for more discussions and more interactions. You can contact us anytime. And we will subscribe in our ICN newsletter and follow us on social media. Thank you so much. This is the end of the webinar, and I hope that you will have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you, folks, again.
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you, interpreters, organizers, panelists, family, everyone. Great work.
Yeah, thanks to all the interpreters for their support. Thank you so much.